Here with GB. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mark Sharoff. I'm a research manager with GBTA, and I'm really excited about the panel that we have for you. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. This is a panel discussion, and we want it to be interactive. So we would encourage you to type any questions or comments in the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to address. I also want to mention this webinar is loosely based on research that we did with HRS. So I would like to thank them for their support. They are a really great partner. We've done a number of studies with them. And you probably know if we didn't have partners like HRS, most of our research wouldn't be possible. So we're really grateful for their support. I mentioned this is based on a research study, so I want to give you a quick overview of the study that we did. The study is based on a survey of travel managers in the US, Canada, and Europe. And we looked at two different topics, but we're only going to talk about one of these today, and it has to do with hotels. But I want to give you a quick overview of both of these topics. The first topic is stakeholder collaboration. How do travel managers work with stakeholders at their company? And we looked at different cross-department functions. These are things like risk management, payment, expense management, meetings management, workforce mobility. How often are travel managers involved in these areas? And how often do they own these areas? And how much time do they spend working with stakeholders? So that's the first area, but we're not really going to talk about that today. The second area, and this is what we are going to talk about, this has to do with hotel negotiations. And specifically, how can travel managers work with different stakeholders and departments at their company to get more value out of their hotel negotiations and deepen their relationships with hotels? We call this convergence, and we'll give you a definition of what this looks like. But if you're interested in either of these topics, I would encourage you to check out this study. If you're a GBTA member, you can get it for free on the GBTA Hub. But if you're not a member, you still can get it for free on the HRS website. So that's all from me. I want to introduce the moderator today. He's with HRS. He's the SVP and Managing Director of the Americas. Will Pinnell, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. It's good to be on today's webinar with you. And we're going to spend the next hour hearing from a couple people that I think you'll find incredibly insightful into this topic. Thank you to GBTA for setting this time aside. We are grateful to have participated with them on this industry research. And of course, we are looking for more and more ways to drive educational efforts in hotel procurement. So before we begin, let me just provide a few highlights that we have seen in the marketplace as it relates to the Q4 procurement process. In 2024, most of the fiscal year negotiations have kicked off. They're in overdrive at this point. We see volume rebounds amid a varying degree of increasing business activities. Of course, there are concerns about safety always, but certainly security is paramount, given that we see regional conflicts in the EU, the Middle East. The US State Department is now issuing worldwide caution warnings. And so I think as you think about the procurement process, not only is it about prices, it's about ensuring the people that you're managing travel for are safe. It's also, of course, about sustainability, and that is increasingly a top priority, especially for multinational corporations that have a significant amount of stay in Europe. We're also starting to see sustainability play a bigger role in the way in which we see hotels procured here in the US. Of course, we have inflation, which is another factor that is something that as travel buyers, you're struggling with. Hotels also have higher operating costs that are driving kind of transient rate increases. So in October, American Express reported that they were seeing rates of 10 to 12.6% in key North American markets. That included business destinations such as San Jose, Boston, Chicago. Dallas was at 8.2%. New York was at 6.8%. But the same is happening overseas as well. In Mumbai, rates are jumping as high as 15% year over year. Bogota, 14%. Paris, 11%. This American Express report mentioned an avenue for buyers to mitigate these increases by combining transient and meeting spends to unlock some of this rich insight and data, which is what we're going to spend some time today talking about. GBTA and HRS, we first identified this growing trend in a report that we issued back in July of this year, following the convention in Dallas. And the topic, in fact, it drew a sold-out crowd at a session that we had there. And I think there are a few reasons why that was. 54% of buyers think that their company would achieve greater efficiencies and or savings via convergence. And that number jumps from 54% up to 67% for travel buyers that oversee programs where there's more than $30 million in annual spend. When you look at both transient and meeting data for top clients, our top clients, HRS found that destination overlap was up to 72%. And at HRS, we've also seen in some cases where converging these two areas of the business, transient with meetings and long stay, we've seen savings as high as 16%. So the question is, why aren't we seeing a more universal approach in practice of convergence? How can you as buyers on today's webinar, how can you negotiate to take steps on leveraging that spend, transient, meeting, long stays? How are hotels open to it? Those are the questions we hope to answer today. We've got a couple of experts, as I mentioned, to share their insights and opinions on this topic. And we're also going to use some polling technology to ask you, as we go through today's presentation, on your thoughts as well, and get your feedback in real time. So without further ado, let me just make some introductions. So the first is Makiko Barrett. So I suspect many of you know Makiko. She is the Senior Director of Global Procurement and Travel at Automation Anywhere, a leader in robotic process automation based in San Jose, California. Prior to that, Makiko managed the global travel program for a variety of different companies, including Yahoo, LSI Logic, and Elon Pharmaceuticals. Most of you also know she is the president of the GBTA Silicon Valley chapter. She also holds a BA in English from Aoyang Gakuen University in Tokyo, Japan. She's originally from Japan, but was raised in Houston and Japan. So when she's not at work, she volunteers for the Humane Society of Silicon Valley. Makiko, before we get into the conversation on convergence, would you like to share some highlights regarding the size and scope of your program? And then we'll introduce Sean.
Sure. Thank you for having me on this webinar today. So right now I work for a Silicon Valley startup, as Will had alluded. It's robotic process automation. I have travel department and procurement department reporting to me. So luckily I have great visibility into my program overall. But again, it's a startup, so we only have about $10 million in travel spend, including large meeting. Before I had much larger programs, so things are a little bit different. So strategy, of course, needed to be adjusted. And then we are a software company. So during pandemic, nobody was traveling. Everything went to virtual. And even now, only half of the volume has come back.
Wow. Excellent. Well, thank you. We can't wait to hear some of your insights, Makiko. Let me introduce Sean Parker. Sean is the Executive Director of Strategic Accounts and Corporate Group Sales at Hilton and is based in Atlanta, Georgia. Sean entered the hospitality industry upon completing his MBA at Emory's Business School in 2009. He is someone that I think most of us on the call probably have worked with at some point. He leads a team managing a portfolio of Fortune 500 companies and focuses on total account management and the B2B relationship for Hilton's highest value accounts. In his current role, he enjoys partnering with customers to create co-value for travel and meetings and events. He recently also joined the Strategic Account Management Association Board of Directors and is co-chair of the GBTA Meetings and Events Committee. He previously volunteered as a member of the GBTA Accommodation Committee and has participated with GBTA Ladders, where he most recently served as a mentor and where I first got to know Sean. Sean, so great to have you here with us. As a baseline element for our conversation, might you tell us just a little bit about Hilton's strategic account program and maybe how it allows for a converged approach with hotel relationships?
Absolutely, and thanks again for having me on the call today, Will. It's a pleasure to partner with GBTA and HRS to present this insightful conversation. But our strategic account program is comprised of our highest value customers to the Hilton enterprise globally that are best positioned for a mutually valuable relationship. For these customers, we invest the highest level of resources, support, engagement, et cetera, not only from the Hilton worldwide sales team, but from the Hilton enterprise as a whole. We definitely believe in layered relationships to really make that relationship as sticky as it can be. We absolutely welcome a converged approach, but moreover, we focus on the total value that we represent to each other. We acknowledge the total spend and we deploy to the entire account, whether it's travel and meetings, luxury, incentive business, project business, leisure, you name it. If it's controlled spend or managed spend that they want to move to Hilton, we are absolutely open to entertaining that conversation. The last piece that I'll share is that, in our function as Hilton Worldwide Sales, our main task internally is to be a strong channel of delivery to our hotel partners, to our owners, and to our management companies. And when we think about our growing and evolving brand portfolio, we truly have an answer for every stay occasion, every reason for travel that a company might have. Whether it's our newest brand, Spark by Hilton, that just debuted in Mystic, Connecticut, our extended stay brands, or one that I'm personally proud of, the Signia by Hilton Atlanta, that's opening in January, which is truly a premium full service experience that will be second to none. So, across the stay occasion, reasons for travel, we've got you covered, and we've got to deliver to all of those brands globally to keep our owners and management companies happy.
All right, thank you, Sean. So let's talk a little bit about the definition of convergence. So let's go to the next slide. The definition we'll use for the purposes of today, and Mark shared this with you as we kicked today's session off, and you might have been getting a coffee, maybe missed the first couple of minutes, but the definition we'll use today is convergence is bundling all of your transient meetings and group long stay volumes into one inclusive lodging RFP to really take full advantage of the spend that your company is putting in the hands of a particular hotelier, trying to wrap your arms around what that spend looks like so that not only are you thinking about the transient segment, you're thinking about these in totality so that it gives you leverage to have those discussions and negotiate with the hotels. I will say that, Makiko, let me maybe start with you. You've managed travel and hotel procurement for several programs across your career in travel management. Can you maybe share with us the history when it comes to convergence and maybe how it's progressed or how you're practicing that today?
Sure. Well, I think it's very siloed. It has been siloed. Today, it's still in silo. So I worked for much larger companies before. That time, I was only managing the transient side of it. And there was a separate meeting department. Typically, they fall under marketing. They might have a global events team or events department that's part of marketing. They don't always work together. Sometimes, if let's say air booking is involved for a meeting, we get in. But until then, there's no discussion about venue sourcing, anything. And then also, you've talked about combining mobility as well. That's typically for larger companies, it's a different department. A lot of times it falls under HR. Again, travel department comes in if there needs to be air booking. So you don't get consulted on the venue sourcing side. Smaller companies, I think there's a better handle of it. Like I said earlier, because I have indirect procurement team reporting to me, and we have a no PO, no pay policy. So I get to see both sides very clearly. However, it's not on the same platform. So that's the difficulties. You have multiple sources for reports that you always have to gather. So again, like bigger companies, I think it's a lot more siloed. You always have to ask for reports so that you're cognizant of the overall spend in the company. It is usually not ready to be consumed at your fingertips.
Got it. And maybe to follow up, Sean, you work with a broad range of Fortune 500 companies, and to the points that were just made, smaller corporate programs with the right combination of volume and growth attributes are some of the types of companies which you may not directly work with. But you did talk about the strategic account programs. Could you maybe discuss the parameters around that? Well, I think what we're hoping to hear and discuss is the elements beyond volume that can help a corporation be a strategic account for Hilton or for any other hotel that they might be talking to or working with. I'm looking at the live Q&A that just came in, and one of the questions was around that very thing, that as they're looking at the RFP process, the RFPs don't mention anything about volume discounts when these things are bundled together.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share some insight there. And I think the key point to that question that was raised is that what I've seen, and it's true for Hilton as well, is that it's more impactful at an enterprise level versus individual hotel conversations. Now, of course, industry-wide, it's not unique to Hilton. Hotels value those customers that move more business to them, and they're willing to talk about representing value to each other. But it's not just about having that spend alone. It's really about what can you influence and what can you move. To the parameters of our strategic account program, current value and potential value are table stakes. One thing that we're very keen on is, while we're excited about the current value and what we've received historically, what is even more exciting is the total spend, our market share position, and the opportunity to grow. That excites us even more because we're looking at, we're grateful for what we've received, but it's super exciting when there's a lot of market share to gain and grow from there. Other key components include the desire for a two-way relationship and engagement. We're talking about transparency, access to the highest levels of procurement leadership, up to the C-suite, and stakeholders. If there's a vice president of sales that's having a sales kickoff, we want to know that person and we want to have a relationship. Also, diverse business opportunities for multiple segments, multiple brands, multiple global regions is definitely a plus. I would say strategic partnership with shared goals. So if there's a preferred transient program in place, an MSA in place, a strategic meetings management program, just things that demonstrate a willingness to work together to co-create value. Of course, alignment with Hilton's ESG goals and strategic goals and priorities are important. We have a dedicated commitment to our Travel with Purpose platform, sustainability, DEI, even dynamic pricing in place is something that really excites us. Lastly, I would say that, most of these companies are multinational and they expect globalization from their suppliers. So we're very keen on being globally aligned, but regionally flexible. We're keen on adapting to those sensitivities and trends within specific global regions so that we're ensuring those key parameters have the appropriate weighting based on expectations in that particular market.
Excellent, thank you. So let's go to the next slide, which is around the data included in this research report. So you'll look through this data. I'll give everyone a moment to look at what you're seeing on the screen, but the topic of convergence is certainly foremost in the mind, I think, for most travel management professionals. So here's a look at some of the positive outcomes I think travel buyers see when they're able to use convergence when they engage their hotels. And as you look through this data, one of the highlights we've pointed out here on the right is that consolidated data 70%, greater discounts 66%, process efficiencies 57%, and time saved on the RFPs 57%. So clearly there are multiple benefits that we're seeing to how this data converges. I might start with you, Makiko, and just ask, is this list in line with what you've seen and your expectations in managing a program that focuses on convergence?
Not so much is what I'm going to say. So consolidated data, yes, like I said, you may have to ask for reports periodically to get the overall spend. So 70%, I am not surprised. Greater discounts, converging all the sectors, that's not always the case from my experience. Number one, hoteliers are not really as excited as giving us both transient rates and meeting rates at all. Because I have a small program, of course, I don't really get it even if I asked, but even talking to my peers in Silicon Valley chapter, even the large organizations like multinational, global, they were not as successful as getting both transient and meeting rates sourced in the same RFP at the same time. And the reason could be, the hotels might not have adequate meeting space to offer, or meeting department doesn't want to be pigeonholed into, oh, now we can only use preferred hotels. Also, hotels don't want to offer the same rate because depending on the seasonality, they could actually offer much higher rate than the transient rate. So it's not an easy answer. It depends on seasonality, maybe day of the week. But do you always get greater discounts? No, not so much.
Great, really good insight. So if you weren't taking notes, we're going to make this recording available to everybody, because I think that what you touched on are some of the challenges in managing a converged program that I think then we'll want to make sure we can go back through and talk about how do we solve those challenges. Let's go to the next slide and just ask Sean, how do hotels respond to this idea of convergence? So if it's not all of them are familiar with it. Some may be familiar, but some of the challenges I think we just heard about, they may not be able to issue or offer the same rates. They're typically dealing with two different people, sometimes the meetings and events person and the travel person. They've dealt with these people differently. They've traditionally gone through a different process. Maybe you can speak, Sean, to just Hilton's response when a strategic account, seeks to leverage convergence as it begins to negotiate for a certain property or a certain region. Does it differ by property versus brand level and or the scope of the request? Maybe help us understand how that works.
Yeah, certainly. I would say that for us, it's all about process alignment between the different segments, target-based expectations, and then compliance, right? If a customer can demonstrate their ability to direct or influence these three areas, we would say that there's now a foundation established upon which we can actively focus on convergence. Another thing that we think about is, what is our relationship starting point? What is the maturity of the relationship? Is it a long-term relationship with established trust? Has there been demonstrated delivery on commitments? Do we have dynamic pricing already in place? All of these would indicate a maturity of the overall relationship versus a brand new or cold starting point. The last thing I would say is that, I appreciate the vocabulary of convergence. I've been working with my son in his test prep and expanding his vocabulary. But we would like to also talk about 3 additional C words. And in addition to convergence, because it's not just having the spend alone, but it's also about, the willingness and ability to move market share. So the additional C words that we would add would be compliance. What is the compliance to the booking tool? Is everyone following the program that's in place? Centralized, especially on the meeting side. Is there a strategic meetings management program in place? Is there a meetings policy? The sourcing and the booking, is it highly fragmented, or is it going through a centralized process? And then lastly, consolidation. If we're talking about convergence, let's also talk about consolidation of suppliers. Hilton, especially with our strategic accounts partners, we're very keen on knowing, are we one of many or are we one of a few? Because if we're talking about convergence, delivering that to 10 partners is much different than delivering that to 2 or 3. So those are the additional C words that we like to bring up in the convergence conversation.
All right. Thank you for the vocabulary, Sean. Appreciate it. So we're about halfway through today's discussion. And so at this point, I want to raise a couple of different polling questions. And so this is where it becomes interactive for all of you. So take a look at the screen. We're going to ask you to respond with one of these 4 choices. So looking at your hotel procurement activities for 2024, how often are you combining transient and meeting segments? So we're going to give everybody about 30 seconds to answer this question. Most of the time, sometimes, rarely, and never. So I think within the poll that you'll see pop up, you will be able to provide us an answer. And then based on your responses, we're going to share these in real time in just a moment. So this is looking at the procurement activities for 2024. So as we go forward, how often are you combining the meeting segments? We'll give everybody another couple of seconds to answer. All right. So the results. Looks like the rarelys have it at 51%, followed by the nevers at 36%. So 87% of you on today's webinar rarely or never look at convergence. So we want to say thank you, first of all, for joining today's discussion and the interest. Clearly, there's an opportunity, I think, for the buyers on today's call to incorporate this. Perhaps if 2024 is already underway, if you have some sort of continuous RFP process happening, you can incorporate that into it. But let's ask another question. Let's ask a second question, which is your property and or chain open to negotiating with corporates in converged scenarios that includes or you're combining transient and meeting segments? So the first question was for buyers. This question is for hoteliers. And so we'll ask the question again and give you 30 seconds. Again, if you're a buyer, please refrain from answering this. But if you are a supplier, a hotelier on today's call, are you open to negotiating with corporates in these types of converged scenarios, which includes combining transient and meeting? Yes, no, or only in select scenarios where the corporation has reached a defined threshold in the past or is willing to commit to a specific threshold for 2024. All right. So the answer, only in select scenarios, 50%. No or not at all, 25%. So again, Similar results on the supplier side. 75% are not doing it, or only in select scenarios are they doing it. So really interesting data that provides us, I think, with some insight to my fellow panelists here on how the audience is viewing convergence. So let's go to the next slide. In the second half of our discussion today, we want to focus a little bit about the here and now. And so, we've covered, I think, our initial basis on what Convergent is, how you're using it, et cetera. We want to take a step back and see how this actually fits into our environment for today around hotel procurement activities for 2024. So the HRS and GBTA survey highlighted several challenges from a buyer perspective. The key finding was that 55% said getting favorable hotel supplier deals was somewhat or very difficult. And as you look at these particular data points, you'll just see how difficult it is based on different types of suppliers. So, hoteliers being the most challenging, perhaps, in thinking about this data. I might ask Makiko, any feedback or insight into this particular set of data?
If you ask this question today, you might get a little bit different answer with everything going on the airline side right now. But hotels, so I'm in the middle of the hotel RFP for next year. And the market is still soft. So I am quite content with what I am seeing so far. I think Asia is seeing more increases, but more difficulty comes from the meeting side for me. Lack of availability. Also, the meeting requests come in very last minute, much more so than before pandemic. So it's hard to get a competitive rate at a hotel. So maybe if that's included, I would definitely put hotels as number one, difficult to negotiate.
Got it. Sean, anything to add?
I would just say that, it can be difficult. These responses make sense to me based on, the level of visibility and control they have over that total spend. I would say if it's just presented, hey, this is our transient spend with Hilton, and we also happen to have these meetings in your hotel, that's not as exciting as an established and a demonstrated ability to move that volume to Hilton. So this would make sense to me, especially if it's in a spend that isn't controlled or influenced,
Right.
to where just by the total spend alone, it's not going to make it an easier experience.
Got it. I would also, we talked about it at the top of the hour, but I would encourage everyone to download the white paper itself, because I think there's some more data there that'll give you better insights. There's an executive summary for the first couple of pages of the white paper, which is more than 40 pages in length. And one of the points I think that is made in the paper that then is expressing itself, I think, through some of the data that we're seeing, is that only about 25% of travel managers in the US own the meetings side of the business. And so part of this challenge in Convergence is that these are often run by different departments. In fact, in that same research paper, the white paper that we are producing today's webinar from, 40% say meetings and events mostly work in silos within the organizations. And so I think, what we're going to have to do to have Convergence be something that's more relevant as we think about it in 2025 is you're going to have to not just negotiate differently, but you're going to have to think about how you communicate more effectively within the organizations you're a part of if you actually want to maximize some of that spend. So let's just go to the next slide. So this is, only as you look at the data here, it's In fact, I think this is really interesting. Travel and workforce mobility programs largely work in silos. So a little bit to the point that I made, hey, you've got very disparate systems of how they talk. Similar challenges with mobility from travel, largely not integrated with any kind of workforce mobility employee relation programs. So when we think about mobility, it's just people traveling and working in different parts of the world. Certainly, this is coming into play much more frequently post-pandemic than it did prior. Only 11% of travel managers say that the two programs are mostly integrated at their company as it relates to relocation or other types of mobility. Let me go back to Makiko. You've managed multiple programs yourself, and I know you're engaged with a broader range of program leaders given your role within the Silicon Valley GBTA chapter. What's your reaction to this particular finding? Is it surprising, not surprising? Do you have any kind of story to share on when it comes to trying to forge relationships between kind of current meeting teams and event teams and also the travel teams for some of the companies you've worked for?
Sure. I am not surprised to see the numbers here. We work in tandem, but not always. And then the reason is, unless you're a large company, you could be the only travel manager in the company, right? So you do sourcing for hotels, air, TMCs, whatever. And then you have to also manage the day-to-day operations, fixing online booking tools or updating policies. There's so much time that we have. So can we take on mobility and meeting sourcing, everything? No, absolutely not. We're also managing technology. That's becoming our main focus of the job these days. So that's why I am not surprised to see these numbers. But can we do better? Absolutely. I think you can always reach out to the meeting managers or events team or mobility team who could be under different department and share data and work together. Luckily, right now, because I work for SMB, all the contracts flow to me when anything is around T&E. So I do see all of the meetings agreements come to me, and it helps for the hotelier to see one face rather than myself and 5 different meeting managers, right? So I think for that, I think I'm helping a lot, but for larger organization, I just think that is not possible.
Got it. Good. Well, let's go to the next slide. So a hotelier's perspective on convergence. So Sean, I'm going to toss this one to you. As I look at the questions and answers that have come in, there have been a number of questions posed. Most of them are in line with kind of what I think you're about to talk through. But the sentiment in most of the questions being asked is that a lot of pushback from hotels and global account managers to offer groups and meetings rates, that often hoteliers are reluctant to think about these two things together. We've, for many years, there's a comment here, tried convergence and the hotels were not agreeable. So good to hear they're now open to considering this approach. So as we address this question, there's another question that came up. Are companies who deploy this strategy, are there companies who do it well? You don't have to get names, of course, but curious if you could share kind of whether this is happening and is it enabled by technology platforms or anything else that you might be able to share as it relates to some of the success factors involved. And Sean, I know that you had referenced that the majority of your strategic accounts, you're tracking data across various segments. And we often hear hoteliers want to push back on buyers that leverage convergence and negotiations. How do you think about just kind of working with them? How do you utilize the data you compile in the course of your relationships with your accounts? Could you maybe give us a fresh take on how Hilton is trying to collaborate and work with clients on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, and it's definitely not the majority of our strategic accounts customers exercise convergence or have an aligned program. But what we have found is that whether they are aligned on their side or not, the fact that we are is beneficial to them. A lot of times we can give them insight to their total spend and their total program that can help them in their journey if they want to work towards total alignment. The other thing that I'll say though too is that, to some of the comments in the chat, I can't underscore enough that it's more valuable at an enterprise level, because when you think about what a company and their total spend represents to the Hilton system as a whole globally versus what they might be able to deliver to an individual hotel or an individual market, it's far greater. And when you think about the role or the function of a global sales organization, it's about representing that company's value to the total enterprise. Now, I would say outside of that, within a microcosm of that at the hotel level, I'm sure that they do that within the total value of this relationship to our hotel as a whole, but I'm sure that's probably reserved in their instance, just as it is in ours, for the highest value customers. If you take, the top 10%, top 20% of a hotel's customers that they worked with, maybe those customers are realizing that total value acknowledgement. But I don't think that a hotel can do that for all of their customers all the time, right? No different than Hilton. We really specialize in executing this at the top end of our account segmentation, at the highest value customers, because we're going to have the greatest level of investment of resources, time, energy, effort in expectation for a high return. We think about it as an investment model, right? And really being thoughtful about the selection of the accounts that live in that roster that we've defined as highest value can really be of value to the full enterprise, which is our primary remit to our internal customer owners and management companies. But I would just say that, compiling the data, as you mentioned, it's been really useful. I'll tell a few quick stories. One was in the bid process for a global most preferred relationship, where the first 3 years that I was with Hilton, we were not global most preferred. We had lost that status, and we finally had the opportunity to win it back. And what we did is we evaluated the total spend for travel and meetings globally versus Hilton current market share, which was very low because we were not globally most preferred. But when we looked at the data of the meeting spend that we stand to gain, when we look at, we're not doing much of anything exciting on the transient side, but look at what they're spending with the rest of the world. It told us that their global most preferred program really meant something. When they could truly deliver it to the enterprise, and they demonstrated that because Hilton's receiving not much at all because we were outside of that, and the companies that are inside of that were getting all the business, that was exciting to us. Because when you think about it, centralized, they have compliance and they have consolidation. So when we positioned ourselves to win that deal, the data that we saw, the opportunity that it represented, it opened the door for us to have a conversation about a meetings agreement with legal terms, which creates the efficiencies that the poll showed, but also concessions, which represents savings and additional value. So I think when you have that broad conversation about value to each other, it can open the doors, because in the table stake of current value, in this particular example, the current value is not exciting. But because of what they can move and what their total spend is that they represented, we were very excited. We won the deal, and now we're reaping the benefits of being global most preferred with that customer. To the other questions about customers or companies that are doing it well, I would say what we've seen, professional services. So if you think about finance and insurance, very keen on the way that they manage their spend. Consultancies, we've seen a very good focus there. Technology customers, they are keen on this approach. And, also I would say our airline customers, because if you think about in that bucket, they've got not only travel and meetings, they also have crew, they have project business, lots of trainings programs, things of that nature. So we're really working with our airline customers about their total spend. And we've seen some instances where an established, crew or meetings relationship has opened the door to a business travel relationship. Not as common, but we welcome that approach as well. Especially, we think we'll see more of that as we've recently announced the launch of a Hilton for Business that's focused on small and medium businesses. It'll officially launch in January, but we anticipate more of our group customers that don't have an existing transient relationship with Hilton might explore that Hilton for Business option, and meetings or other segments can open the door for business travel.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. I suspect there are a lot of suppliers on today's call that are scribbling down some notes from the way Hilton is, I think, leading many parts of the convergence efforts. So thank you. Going back to some of the questions that had come across in the live polling, we do have the sentiment is that hotels aren't willing to do it, but we do want to ask the buyers that question. So let's open this up for all of the buyers and use this as an opportunity just to ask you what seems to be some of the sentiment coming across through the Q&A, which is, which of the following barriers have prevented your company from combining transient and meeting volume when negotiating with hoteliers thus far? So let's give you an opportunity here in the polling to ask. The question, you can see, I'm going to read off the choices and give everybody about 30 seconds to answer. Again, this is for buyers. Hotels aren't willing to do it. So this is multiple choice if you would like to select more than one. Internal silos, fragmented data, fragmented technology, or we haven't thought of doing this, or other, or none of the above. You may or may not have the ability to select more than one choice, but choose the one that is, if not, the most applicable. So the single greatest barrier that's preventing your company from combining these things together. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to answer, and then we'll show you the results. All right. So, wow, surprisingly, it may not be that hotels aren't willing to do it as much as it is around the internal silos and the data point that I referenced around these parts of the organization simply reporting up and through different parts of the company. So the travel meetings program reports to a different part of the organization than the rest. You've got fragmented data at 30%. And the fact that hotels aren't willing to do it, those things look like they're neck and neck for kind of the number 2 and number 3 slots respectively. May not be as much about fragmented technology. It certainly thinks that there aren't many of you that have not already started thinking about this at less than 10%. So good insight. Any comments, Sean or Makiko, based on that feedback?
It's pretty expected. Hotels are not willing to do it. I hear it all the time, including myself. Unless you are a sizable company, and majority of the travel managers who belong to GBTA are not working for huge enterprises, right? So I can already hear disappointments like, oh, you have to have a global deals with the chain hotels. Then maybe we can talk about it. So, and then the silos, we do have it on buyer side, but I think there's also silos on the hotel side too. So both having silos definitely not helping the matter. So I really welcome the opportunity, like Sean saying, like they're focusing more to converging the programs, and I really welcome that.
I would just add,
Excellent.
These results make sense to me. I'm, being the optimist on the supplier side, I see this as 70% are reasons other than hotels aren't willing to do it, right? And I think that it's also good to just have open, transparent conversations and being creative about how you expand the definition of value, right? And just being realistic about what would be valuable to that hotel or to that chain. You might think that, this much revenue to you represents great value, but you have to understand about where that falls in the total scheme of their business mix and their business model. But I would say it doesn't always have to be perfect. I'm going to move 20, this many points of meetings shared to you, and that equates to this. But, we're open to conversations about, I don't get a lot of small meetings with you. You send all of your small meetings to our competitor. I'd really like to grow with you in small meetings. How can we explore that conversation? Or we haven't opened the door to your project business. I'd love to get more of that. Can you talk to me about moving more project business to Hilton or to this property? And maybe if the buyer can create a pathway to what does growth look like? What does a strengthened relationship look like? And maybe it's in one small pocket. That might open the door. If I can see how you're willing to grow with me together, okay, let's explore, an expansion of value for all of us. But how can we have a pathway to success? And then that can open the door. It doesn't always have to be perfect and we're going to move this much to you and that much, but where can we grow as a first step?
Excellent. We have a couple more slides and a couple more questions to ask our panelists. So let's ask these last couple of questions. And if we have time, I think we've addressed many of the questions that have come through the Q&A as we've gone through today's webinar. This question is maybe for Makiko, and let me provide some comments from the questions and answers. The Q&A has been used also more as a commentary on your own programs, which is fine. This is good insight for us. One of the comments that came through the Q&A was that hotels have tunnel vision, especially for small to mid-sized companies, especially the bigger chains. I can sometimes do better with smaller boutique chains in Convergence than I can with the mega large hotels. The silos on the hotel side are often between a local and property management company and the global national chain. That's another comment. And then a third comment was that hotels are siloed. There's often a disconnect between transient and meetings, even at the property level. So I think that one of the things that we want to do kind of following today's discussion is what's next. And I think a lot of the people on today's call, Makiko, want to know, how do I put this into practice? And what do I need to do to get started? One of the things that I found in my relatively short time at HRS is that often data is driving the decisions that companies make about the way they manage their program. So maybe the question is for you, how can data drive this convergence?
I think data is the only thing that drives convergence, to be honest, because without data, you're just talking ideas. There's no concrete proof, right? So I think the important thing is that you do get visibility on all resources. So not just the TMC data, you have to have a good handle on expense data, credit card, and PR, POs, because a lot of the meeting contract flow through PO. It doesn't always go through T&E. So you have to have all the data. And when you have the business reviews with your hotel partners, show the data and show them how much volume, well, not so much volume, but how much spend that you're directing to your hotel partner. Because oftentimes the DOSs or NAMs, they don't know. They only see, what's attached to my negotiated rate itself. And we all know because of, during pandemic, post-pandemic, our negotiated rates are not always the lowest anymore. And I have seen in my company a lot of deviance. The people are just booking the lowest available rate in OBT that's available. It could be bar, it could be TMC's consortium rate. And I have no way of stopping them. And I am also not going to ask them, oh, I know my corporate rate is $50 more, but please book it, because hotels don't know that it's Automation Anywhere employees that's traveling. Like, I understand the logic, but companies are watching the bottom line. They're going to book the lowest fare rate. So bringing those data together and then showing it to the business meetings will definitely help because you want to arm your hotel's representative with the data so they can go back to the senior management to give us the great rate for the following year.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important for the people on today's call to realize that a lot of the data that comes through simply for your transient isn't enough as you think about how to combine the different data sources. And to the extent that you're capturing your meetings and event spend or card data, collecting that, adding it to what you might receive from a TMC, right, starts to give you a better picture of what that spend is, and that data is going to help you make better decisions. So we have time, I think, for one last question. We're going to flip over now to Sean. How can hotels have success with strategic accounts? And I think for the buyers on today's call, you've mentioned that you have a strategic account program, but for the benefit of maybe some of the other hoteliers on today's webinar, could you share some elements of success that you see from strategic accounts, and are there steps you're willing to share with hoteliers when it comes to engaging corporations? One of the last comments that came in at just about 5 minutes ago was that in my 30 years, no hotel has ever agreed to convergence. They often state that the transient and groups side each have their own profit center requirements and cannot work together. I tell them the money is going into the same pair of pants, just a different pocket. They claim their hands are tied. Someone else agreed. So I don't know if that's a comment aimed at a particular supplier or chain, but Sean, I would value your expert opinion here in the last few minutes we have.
Sure, thanks, Will. And I would say, I'm one of the few in the supplier world that's well versed on both sides, right? And I would say there's some validity to that. And a huge portion of our role in global sales, not just Hilton, but I'm sure it's true industry wide, is, as I mentioned earlier, representing enterprise value to our hotels. We have to amplify what that customer represents so that if it is a fragmented scenario, if ownership wants this, management wants this, and our revenue management strategy is X, we have to come in and tell that story. So that's true at the highest levels of strategic account management. We're hoping that will become true as we kick off our Hilton for Business program for small, medium businesses. But I would say some of the gains that we've experienced, that I will say when suppliers get this right, our value, we have a clearly defined value proposition to our customers, but also to our internal customer, owners, investors, management companies. And it's truly about superior growth and profitability. Back to the investment model concept, high investment for an expected high return. We're deploying this way to these top value customers because we really want to extract that full value. What have we seen? Coming out of a pandemic, we saw faster post-pandemic recovery. We've seen superior customer loyalty. When you think about Hilton Honors penetration and engagement with our fast track programs, we're seeing a great return there. Top customer engagement and accessibility. I'm sure if anybody's been to GBTA or IMEX and you walk past the Hilton booth, it's full, it's busy, it's rocking. That's very intentional, and that's a direct outcome of this level of investment to these relationships. We're coming off of year 2 of record-setting hosted buyer attendance at IMEX. Targeted commercial delivery where we need it. We just recently opened the Waldorf Astoria, Washington, D.C., just converted the Boston Park Plaza to be the Hilton Boston Park Plaza. These owners, these hotels, they're expecting targeted delivery. Can you steer the business where the system needs it? Our first stop is our strategic account relationships, because we know that from those deep relationships, we can deliver the business where we need it. I would say, just to wrap up, to our hotel partners on the call, a few tips without giving away the Hilton secret sauce is expand the conversation about value. Think broadly to both buyers and suppliers. Shift the conversation from generic, I have a lot of spend, to specific, I can move this spend to you, and this is how, and this is when. because the risk is heavily on the hotel side, the supplier side. Okay, you want a discount for what we hope you will move or what you've committed to move. Help mitigate that risk a little bit by being more specific and delivering a pathway to success. I would say for our suppliers on the call, have an ability to truly qualify total spend. You want to mitigate your risk a little bit by just taking, face value what you've been told, but what is the research that you're doing as well to qualify? Is this it's Shark Tank, we talk about it all the time internally. Is this worth investing in and believing in? And then lastly, to our supplier partners on the call, be realistic about what you can deliver on, and be careful not to overpromise and overdeliver. A lot of times when we win globally most preferred deal and there's an incumbent that's been displaced, it's because there was a lot of promise and not a lot of delivery. And we go through a bit of a lengthy process, but it's because we want it to be true in practice and not only in promise.
Excellent. Sean, thank you so much. That is going to wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank GBTA for the time today. If you are struggling with convergence, I would encourage you to talk to someone at HRS. This is one of the areas that we help corporations with. If you would like more information about what we spoke to today, you can scan the QR code that is on your screen. That'll take you directly to the page where you can access this white paper. GBTA has also assured us that today's recording will be made available to its members via the GBTA hub, so you can access it there. Mark, any other last closing comments from GBTA? If not, I want to say thank you to all of our participants for joining us today.
I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And again, thank you to HRS and our great panelists today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.